Lascan Corla, I'm opposed to this particular carbon tax structure because it fails to differentiate between those who can avoid paying this tax and those that don't have any choice but to pay it. Carbon taxes must be about driving change to a more sustainable country, which is far less dependent on imported fossil fuels. It's not supposed to be about increasing government income. It's about getting people out of cars and onto our buses and trains. I strongly believe that those people living in rural Ireland, 37% of our population, do not have the alternatives available to them, particularly in relation to public transport, and thus can't avoid paying this tax. But it's not just that. This tax is also regressive in that those living in rural communities will pay far more in carbon tax than those living in urban areas, yet the people living in our cities will have jobs locally and alternative transport solutions available to them. By the time 2030 comes along and we have a carbon tax of €100 per tonne, half the households in Dublin will be paying less than €9.11 per week in transport costs when the Dublin bus subsidy is taken into account, while rural commuters will be paying €39.50 a week, up to 4 times more being paid by people who don't have an alternative available to them. 4 times more than those with a bus passing by their door every few minutes. When you look at the heat aspect of this, based on current rates, a typical rural house will pay €1 more per week in 2030 than those living in Dublin. In practical terms, this will be greater because the government will subsidise carbon removal from our gas network through biomethane, whereas families in rural areas will have to borrow substantial money to move away from oil. A congestion charge designed around motor tax would be a far more effective tool in moving those who can from their cars onto public transport. The alternative which I put forward would be to use the national car test and to revise that regime to provide for actual emissions profile of individual vehicles, and that would treat rural areas, people driving long distances, far fairer because they will have a much lower emissions profile than vehicles on congested streets. It would act as an effective congestion charge in this country, and it would encourage the retrofitting of vehicles and the use of alternative fuels. And we need to look at taxation models in this country that suit an Irish situation, not copy and paste a model coming from continental Europe that will not drive the type of change that we need to see here. I just finally want to say that this penalises 37% of our population who live in rural areas, who don't have alternative modes of transport. They're not getting their broadband delivered quicker on foot of today's announcement, and they're not being provided with any new supports to work remotely. And because of that, I will be opposing this provision. Thank you.